Okay, let's unpack this. Think about being at a massive networking event maybe, or, a conference break, the room's buzzing, coffee everywhere, and you're shoulder to shoulder with dozens of people from your industry. Yet right in that moment, when you're surrounded by everyone, this weird sense of isolation just washes over you. It's really strange, isn't it? Feeling totally alone in a crowd.
It is strange, and it's something so many people feel because, well, we tend to think physical presence means connection automatically. But the research, the stuff we looked at, it shows they're really two different things, entirely separate. That loneliness you feel in a busy place, it's actually super common, almost like the signature of modern life sometimes. So our mission today is to cut through all that and really look at the 5 specific psychological factors from our sources. These factors explain exactly why just being near people doesn't automatically mean you feel connected, why you might feel that way.
That's exactly it. We're not after those vague tips like, oh, just be more social. No.
Sure.
We want the nuts and bolts of this feeling. Why does sharing space sometimes feel like being emotionally stranded on a desert island? Let's start with maybe the most obvious one with the research called the absence of depth. Lack of emotional connection.
Right. The number one finding here, pretty much across the board, is that if your social interactions are mostly, superficial, transactional, your brain feels like something's missing, a deficit. Loneliness pops up not because there's no one around, but because there's no real substance in the conversations.
Okay. So if I spend all day talking about work deadlines or, the weather or logistics, just the functional stuff that oils the wheels of life, but I never actually share like an opinion I really hold or something I'm worried about or anything genuinely vulnerable, then having people around almost makes the emptiness feel bigger.
Yeah, exactly. The sources really highlight that difference. Superficial chats often feel like social housekeeping. They're polite, maybe necessary, but they're like empty calories for your social soul. If every single conversation just skims the surface, talking only about outside stuff or tasks, then the physical presence of others actually throws the lack of a real bond into sharp relief. It's like imagine being starving, absolutely famished, and someone puts a huge, beautiful banquet in front of you, but it's all plastic food.
Oh, that plastic fruit analogy is spot on. Looks good. Totally useless for actual hunger.
Yeah.
But okay, let's make it trickier. What if you are talking about deeper stuff, or trying to, but it still feels isolating? This takes us to the second factor, which is maybe more subtle, the invisible barrier, that feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood.
Yeah, this one can be really tough. Because this barrier, this feeling, it can happen even with people you're really close to. Friends, family, partners. The research points out that you might share something, a fact or an event, but if the other person doesn't quite get the emotional significance of it for you, if they don't grasp why it matters so much to your inner world, that's when that invisible wall just kind of slams down.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for me. I know I've felt that. Like trying to explain a big shift in how I see things, or maybe a deep anxiety I have, and the response is just kind of flat, like, oh, don't worry about it, or you think too much. They heard the words, sure, but they completely missed the point, the feeling behind it.
That's precisely the dynamic, that feeling that you constantly have to explain yourself, or worse, being subtly told your feelings aren't quite valid. It creates this profound sense of being alone. You feel like you have to sort of perform, act normal, even when you're trying to share something really personal and unique to you. And the sources really emphasize this. Feeling misunderstood is often more painful than just being physically alone, because it feels like confirmation that your inner reality isn't being seen or valued, even by the people who are supposed to get you.
And what about the self-blame piece? Does that come into it? Like you walk away thinking, maybe I just didn't explain it right, or maybe I am just too complicated.
Oh, absolutely. That self-blame is a huge part of it. Huge. Because we're wired to connect, right? So when an attempt at deep connection falls flat, our first instinct is often to think we failed, to assume the barrier must be something wrong with us, not just, a mismatch in understanding or context. And that self-blame just makes the isolation worse. It's like a double whammy. The conversation is happening technically, but that real recognition you need, it's just not there.
Okay, moving into something very, very current now. How we interact daily. We spend so much time connected online, which brings us perfectly to the third factor. The digital facade, or, the social media illusion.
Yeah, this came up a lot. One key thing we saw was how the sheer amount of digital interaction, likes, quick comments, sharing names, it gives you a simulation of connection, but it often doesn't require any real emotional investment or vulnerability. It's often very low stakes, maybe even one way. You post something, you wait for reactions, but there isn't necessarily that back and forth of sharing something real about yourselves.
Right. It feels like these platforms almost reward putting on a show rather than showing up authentically. You curate this perfect highlight reel of your life, and that gets the likes, the comments, but your actual messy real life stays hidden. So It's like we've built this whole system for seeking connection that ironically kind of punishes the very vulnerability you need for genuine connection.
That's spot on. The sources are pretty clear on this. Getting likes and comments just doesn't satisfy that deep, evolved need we have for real, high-quality, mutual human engagement. When you're feeling lonely, scrolling through hundreds of perfect holiday snaps or amazing achievements on your feed can actually make you feel worse, because you're surrounded by digital evidence of everyone else's seemingly perfect connections, but none of it feels accessible or real to you in that moment. You end up comparing your own, messy internal reality to everyone else's polished outside facade.
Yeah, that comparison trap is brutal. Which actually leads us perfectly into the fourth factor. This one's all about internal conflict, the gap between want and have, specifically personal expectations versus the reality you're finding.
Right. This factor is almost like emotional math. Simple but powerful. If you go into social situations, could be a party, a work meeting, a family dinner, and you're secretly craving these really deep, meaningful, soul-bearing connections. But what you consistently find is just, small talk or surface level interaction. That gap, that discrepancy creates the feeling of loneliness.
So the problem isn't always the people themselves. It might be that I'm bringing movie script expectations for instant bonding to a casual happy hour.
Precisely. Or maybe you expect every new friendship to immediately involve deep secrets and lifelong loyalty. If that's your benchmark and your reality is just polite chats with colleagues about the weekend, the huge space between those 2 points, that becomes the engine driving your isolation. The constant disappointment fuels the loneliness. Even if you're actually being quite social, you keep showing up, searching for something the environment just isn't set up to provide.
That brings up a really practical question then. Is the answer just to lower our expectations? To just accept that most interactions are going to be superficial?
Well, not necessarily lower them across the board, but maybe align them, calibrate them. The guidance suggests you need to match your expectations to the specific context. If you want depth, maybe stop looking for it in 5 minutes of chit-chat at a huge corporate event. Wanting deep connection isn't the problem. Trying to find it in the wrong place or expecting it from every single interaction, that's what sets you up for disappointment.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Aligning, not just lowering. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, finally, we have to talk about the factor that kind of exists outside of the external situation. The fifth factor highlights that sometimes it doesn't matter who's around or how deep the conversation is trying to be, because the barrier is completely internal. These are the internal conditions, specifically things related to mental health.
Exactly. We absolutely have to acknowledge this, because even if you nail the first 4 factors, you find some depth, you feel reasonably understood, you have real-life connections, your expectations are realistic. An underlying mental health challenge, like anxiety or depression or low self-esteem, can still act like a filter, blocking that connection from fully landing.
How does that filter actually work? What does anxiety or depression do specifically to create loneliness, even when people are, genuinely trying to connect?
Well, the research explains it in a few ways. Social anxiety, for instance, often makes someone hypervigilant. They're constantly scanning for any tiny sign of rejection or being misunderstood. So someone might offer genuine kindness, but the anxious filter twists it, interpreting it as pity or maybe thinking it's insincere or even a setup for later hurt. Low self-esteem, on the other hand, can make you feel fundamentally unworthy of connection in the first place. So if someone expresses affection or appreciation, that filter just rejects it. The thought process is like, they can't possibly mean that about me. If they knew the real me, they wouldn't say it.
Wow. So the very presence of people, even kind people, can become almost painful because your internal state stops you from actually receiving or trusting the connection they're offering. It's like a self-imposed isolation bubble, even when you're not physically alone.
It really is. And the irony is brutal. The very things that usually help with loneliness, kindness, shared moments, feeling validated, they can actually become sources of stress because the brain just can't process them in a safe or believable way.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. We've got these 5 big factors: superficiality, feeling misunderstood, the whole digital illusion thing, the gap between expectations and reality, and these internal mental health filters. If we look at how these overlap and interact, What's the main takeaway? What's the core finding about loneliness in a crowd we should really hold on to?
The big picture, the overarching finding, seems to be that loneliness isn't really about how many people are physically near you. It's fundamentally a measure of an emotional deficit. It's the gap between the quality and type of connection you crave and what you're actually experiencing. And if you look at factor 4, expectations, and factor 5, internal conditions together, you can see how a really tough feedback loop can start. Internal struggles, like anxiety or low self-esteem, can actually raise the bar for what feels like a good enough connection, making it almost impossible for reality to ever measure up, which of course guarantees more disappointment and deepens the isolation.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. Loneliness is an emotional measurement, not a physical one. And if we know what we're measuring against these 5 factors, maybe we can start to shift our approach. So what practical guidance can we offer someone listening right now who recognizes that feeling, that paradox of being lonely in a crowd?
Well, the specific guidance we found usually boils down to 2 main things. First, recognize the environment. If you realize you're stuck in superficial mode, try to consciously pivot. Next time you feel that loneliness creeping in, maybe make a deliberate effort to reach out to just one person you trust. Try to move beyond the small talk, aim for a little more depth. And second, maybe even more importantly, take a moment to actually reflect. What kind of connection truly fills your cup? What do you actually need? If what you really crave is that deep mutual understanding, the sources suggest maybe stop pouring so much energy into environments built for performance and quantity. Instead, be intentional about creating or finding spaces where vulnerability and quality connection are actually possible.
That distinction feels key. Identifying what you're truly craving and then aligning your efforts to find that. It really highlights the difference between just being physically in a group versus feeling emotionally part of something, part of a community. Understanding these 5 factors helps us maybe shift our focus from just, counting heads in the room to really thinking about the quality of the connections being made or offered.
Exactly. And maybe here's a final thought to leave with you, the listener. If loneliness is fundamentally about craving these deeper, meaningful connections, how should that change how we think about investing our time, our social energy? Should the priority be trying to be physically present in as many places as possible, hoping something sticks, even if it's mostly superficial? Or should we maybe concentrate our limited resources, time, emotional energy on seeking out and nurturing just 1 or 2 relationships where that deep understanding and mutual recognition feel truly possible? It's worth looking at your own social world through the lens of those 5 factors we talked about. Are the connections you're chasing actually the ones you're set up to find? And are they the ones you truly need?